Excited to kick off with our guest speaker today, Alex Sheen. Alex has been sharing the importance of a promise with people around the world. Alex is the founder of Because I Said I Would. It's a social movement and nonprofit dedicated to the betterment of humanity through promises made and kept. He is someone who truly honors commitment. Alex once walked over 240 miles across the entire state of Ohio in 10 days to fulfill a promise. Alex has impacted millions of people with the Because I Said I Would message through the viral nature of social media. His work has been featured on ABC World News with Diane Sawyer, CNN, the Los Angeles Times, the Today Show, and many other programs. So please help me welcome Alex Sheen, who's recorded a special presentation for you entitled, yes, you guessed it, Because I Said I Would. We'll play that now.
International Coaching Federation, how's it going? My name is Alex Sheen, founder of Because I Said I Would, and I'm coming to you from Cleveland, Ohio. I hope that you are doing well around the world, and something we probably have in common, no matter where we're coming from, is hope. Hope for 2022, right? Let's change this thing around after a couple of tough years. In fact, we want hope so bad that maybe deep down inside, secretly, some of us are wishing for a moment when life changes overnight. We need a dramatic shift. I know that's what some of us are hoping for. Maybe it's something like going viral overnight, right? You know, what would it be like to have something that you posted just be spread immediately around the world? Well, that happened to me once. I know what it's like to go viral through social media to the highest degree. It comes with very strange moments afterwards. Like I remember one time the sixth richest person in the world asked me to come to Guatemala to speak to over 100 billionaires in the same moment, in the same audience. And a lot of life lessons are shared through this interesting spiral that social media can cause. And that's why the International Coaching Federation, they asked me to share a couple of lessons that I learned in this strange journey in 1 year of my life. So I'm going to share that with you. But my viral story, it doesn't start with videos of cute dogs and cats. I kind of wish it did. No, my viral story starts with my dad, shown here. My father was a pharmacist in a hospital for 25 years, but growing up, I just thought of him as an average guy, you know? My father didn't write books, he didn't run marathons, he was no war hero. In fact, if you would have ever known my father in some other life, you would have never gone home and talked about Al Sheen, right? He was far too average, too everyday, too normal for you to do that, right? Unnoticeable. Except for one thing. My father, he was a man of his word to me and to my brother. When he said he was going to be there for you, he showed up. My father was far from a perfect person, but he kept his promises. And it turns out, when it comes to keeping promises, well, it seems like a lot of people don't do that anymore. And so one day, my father, this sort of dweeby pharmacist guy, you know, he's sitting at home, it's 2011, and he hears his phone ring. He goes, he grabs it, he turns it over, and it's the hospital calling. Well, of course, this is where he works, right? So he's got to answer. He swipes, he answers, and on the other line is a doctor, a friend of his that he works with at the hospital. And in this phone conversation, my father is informed that he has been diagnosed with stage 4 small cell lung cancer. Now, my father was a go down swinging kind of man. You know, he came to the United States as an immigrant. And I say that only because sometimes it's not so easy to make it on your own. Sometimes you got to develop some pretty tough skin to get by. And so with this attitude throughout his life, at this point of his diagnosis, my father elected for the most aggressive treatment, for radiation and chemotherapy. Now, a lot of people have heard this phrase before, chemotherapy, but not many people know what it actually is. You see, chemotherapy, this treatment, is quite literally a poison. Developed prior to World War II, it is a primitive concept. You see, the thought was to poison the body so deeply that the cancer simply could not live in its conditions. Now, as extreme as that may sound, you know, life doesn't always give us choices. In so many cases, this is the only way the patient is going to get a chance. Now, remember something for a second. You know, my father was a pharmacist in a hospital for 25 years. He knew more about the treatments he was taking than a lot of people ever will, and with that comes a distinct knowledge, a scientific understanding of the odds that are against you. And in the case of my father, those odds were terrible. But sometimes we got to go down swinging, right? And so my father, he takes his treatment, and it actually starts to work, you know? This cancer that grew so close to my father's heart that it was surgically inoperable, could not be cut out. It began to shrink, you know? So small that you couldn't see it on any of these scans they kept doing on my father over and over and over again. And even him, the most genuine of skeptics, I assure you, he deemed it some sort of miracle that perhaps he was saved. Now, I don't know if your family's ever dodged something like this, but this is obviously good news, right? This is a positive turnaround for his health. So I felt like we had to celebrate, right? You know, I mean, I went to college. I know how to celebrate, right? So I go to my old man, my dad. I say, Dad, you listen. Anything you want, anywhere you want to go. Money is no object. We got to celebrate this moment, this turnaround for your health. Okay, let's hear it, Dad. Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? What does he say? He says, I want Chinese food. Same damn Chinese restaurant every single time. It didn't matter what the occasion was. He was super boring like that. You know how dads are. They got their routine. They like what they like, so whatever. We'll go to this Chinese place his buddy owns for like the 40,000th time. And it was a good meal, you know, a good day. The kind of day that I think a lot about. And the kind of day that, unfortunately, I will not have another one of, because as you've probably already noticed, I speak of my father in the past tense. The cancer would return to his lungs. It would spread into his liver, into his pancreas, and into his brain. On September 4th of 2012, it was a bright morning. In the house that I grew up in as a child, as a grown man, I would go to my father's bedside and I'd play some music for him that I thought he might like. I held his hand, and with the best ability I had as his son, I desperately tried to comfort my father as he died. Now, you and I, we are only strangers, and I do not know if you have ever lost someone that you have loved. I can only say that I have. His name was Sheen. He had 2 boys. I'm one of them. He put a roof over my head. He paid for me to go to college. He never wore a shirt around in the house, which I thought was weird and embarrassing for everybody. But I was named after him. And in the course of all of our losses, we have so many questions. You know, like, why him and why now? Why does it have to be me and my family? And in this struggle, we are afforded very few answers. In my struggle, I was asked by my family to give my father's eulogy, to speak to his greatest characteristic, his greatest quality as a man. And I kept coming back to this thought, the importance of a promise. You see, too often in this life, people say things like, I'll get to it, or tomorrow. Well, the last thing that my father ever taught me is that one day there will be no tomorrow. And the promises that we make and we keep, and those we choose to dishonor, that is what defines us and our character. It always has, long before my father was ever born and long after I go, a single measure of honor that we use so quickly to judge other people, right? How they treat their promises. But perhaps as quickly we should use this measure to judge ourselves. I would give my father's eulogy, and the title of this speech would be Because I Said I Would. And for the very first time at his funeral, I would hand out one of these. I called it a promise card. On the front, it says, Because I Said I Would. On the back, there is nothing else. It is very simple to use. What you do is you take a promise in your life. Maybe it's something small that you said today, Or maybe it's something so deep that it defines part of your purpose for even being on this earth. You write that promise on this card. You go to the person you're making that commitment to. You tell them, I'm going to fulfill this promise. And when I do, I earn this card back. This card is a symbol of my honor, my respect. It is my property, and I'm coming back for it. You go, you fulfill your promise, you come back to that person, you earn your card back, and you keep it as a reminder that perhaps you are a person of your word. Perhaps someone like Al Sheen was to me. And so my father's funeral ends, and I go home. It is the next thing that I would do that would set off a chain of events to the scope of which I may never understand. That's where this internet thing comes in, you know? You see, I make this post online and an offer. I said that I would mail, like physically mail. I said that I would mail 10 promise cards to anybody, anywhere in the world at no cost to anyone, which is the dumbest financial decision I've ever made in my entire life. First lesson today, don't offer free stuff to strangers on the internet, okay? That should go without saying, but I'm not that bright, apparently. You see, this is a picture of the first 5 sets of cards I ever sent out. Now, 5 requests in a day is no big deal. You wake up early, you go to sleep a little late, few here and there, blah, blah, blah. It's not a hassle. But that's 5 requests in a day. What if you were to receive, 50 requests in a day or 500? Or one morning you wake up and that little red notification bubble on your phone, it says 15,000? What do you do then? Well, I would have to figure that out. And that is because since September 4th, 2012, the day that my father left, we have distributed over 9.81 million promise cards to over 153 countries around the world and by request only. 153 countries. You see, it turns out it doesn't matter what language you speak, the color of your skin, how much money you make, how old you are, or who you love. For at least this one thing, we all understand the importance of a promise. It is something that is core and elemental to human existence. I would learn this lesson not just from my father, but from humanity itself. Because people, they started to post pictures of their promise cards. And maybe that's a commitment to someone who's close to you, right? Like a family member. Like this young girl writes, I promise to make life worth living for my sister with Down syndrome every day of her life, and to take care of her when my parents are no longer able to. A promise could be in recognition of a simple fact. Like this young man in the Czech Republic, he knows, he is certain that somebody somewhere has got to need that half liter of blood more than he does. And so he commits to helping the sick or the injured. Sometimes a card wouldn't be used in an exchange between two people. They were used in creative ways. Like I remember this one woman, she wrote, I promise not to text or Facebook while driving. But instead of giving the card to anyone, she just put it in the console of her car. And every time she would get in her car, she would take that card out and she would put it on her phone and twist it as a physical lock screen, a reminder that she cared more about the safety of a stranger than a text that most certainly can wait. But in all the places and all the areas and the people who have used promise cards, there's one place that I love the most, and that's when I see a kid write a promise card. And I'm not talking about kids, I'm talking about little kids, 8-year-olds trying to order their future with their little brains, right? Their promise cards are awesome. Like this 5th grader in Fresno, California writes, I will never get in jail. Right? That's a good one. I hope that all of the members watching this right now maybe jot that one down. And so to see someone so young know the importance of a commitment is awesome. But on the other side of the equation, we see a lot of commitments from parents. In fact, one of my favorite promise cards of all times, that came from a parent, and I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that story. The story of a man named Garth Callahan. Now, Garth is about 48 years old in this picture, and he lives just outside of Washington, D.C., actually closer to Richmond, Virginia. And he's this kind of like cheesy dad. You know what I'm talking about? Like this dude dresses up as Star Wars characters, and then he goes places. You know what I'm saying? Like this is not like Halloween or something. This is just like a Tuesday in Garth's life, right? He dresses up. He embarrasses his daughter along the way, and that's the most important part of this story. Garth has one daughter, one child. That's it. Her name's Emma, pictured here in the 2nd grade, pictured here in the 8th grade. Now, ever since Emma was about in the 2nd grade, she started receiving these little like napkin notes in her lunchbox. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like little words of encouragement scribbled on a napkin from her dad. Okay, so picture this: you're an 8-year-old girl, right? You know, you're skipping to the lunchroom or whatever 8-year-old girls do to get from place to place. You sit down at the table, you take out your peanut butter and jelly sandwich, your chips, your apple slices, and then you see something like this. Remember that guy who quit? Neither does anybody else. It's a little aggressive at like 8 in the morning, right? Writing that, but he means well. You know, coaches, they can be aggressive, even if it comes in the form of being a parent. Or how about this one? Yesterday's home runs don't win today's games. Babe Ruth. Sometimes it's hard to connect with people, especially parent to child. And so we just do our best. And for Garth, that was writing these napkin notes. Now, my father never wrote me any sort of napkin notes, and that's quite all right. But unfortunately, there's something else that Emma's father and my father, there's something else they have in common. It's in his kidney. Garth is sitting in a small white room, a doctor's office. Hearing this news for the first time, he doesn't quite understand what it means. Stage 4 cancer of the kidney. He says to the doctor, well, we'll just remove the kidney, right? Or chemotherapy, I've heard of that. Whatever it is, I got a daughter to take care of, and we'll just move forward. It'll be all right, he says. The doctor looks him in the eye and says, Garth, you are going to die of this. Garth is given an 8% chance of living past 5 years. These two pictures were taken 46 days apart. You see, when someone tells you that the ride, it's almost over, that your time on this earth, it is coming to a close, you begin to think about this concept of time and how we have spent it, what we are truly committed to. You think about everybody that you love on this planet, and those are the thoughts that would go through Garth's mind. As he's sitting at a kitchen table late at night, he decides to take pen to paper, not on a napkin, but on a promise card. Garth writes, I will write 826 napkin notes for Emma. You see, that is one note for every day of class Emma has left until she graduates from high school. So that no matter what happens to him, no matter the day of the last goodbye, even if he cannot be there, that note, it's still gonna be, because every single one of them has already been written in advance. Dear Emma, sometimes when I need a miracle, I just look into your eyes and realize that I have already created one. Love, Dad. There's so many moments in life where we try with best intentions to guide others. And so maybe this story could be an example for a lot of different, perspectives, piece of advice. But for me, I think it reminds me that when life is out of our control, and we need to choose promises over goals. What do I mean by that? Well, first, I think it's cheesy that it rhymes. That was completely by accident. It just came out that way. But the point I'm trying to make here is that goals are sometimes, in this distant future that we can't quite grasp onto because there are all these external circumstances, and it almost gives us an anxiety because we can't grip it. We don't have control over it. But a promise is something that I can do, something that I can focus on. something that has a lot less room for excuses. And so that's when I feel overwhelmed, that's where I go. I've tried my best to be whoever the world assumes the founder of Because I Said I Would should be, all of these supporters. But that's been difficult because, these people, they ask for your help. And I cannot help them all because I'm only one man and that is all I will ever be. What I'm trying to say to you is you have to kind of know who I was before all this started. Before I ever clicked that button, before it ever went viral, I was just some dude. I was just some guy working at a software company. And I'm gonna be a little cocky for a second, and I apologize, but I was the youngest manager in the entire place. Fortune magazine, they got a list of top 100 companies to work for in the country, and we were on it. I made a 6-figure income, 5-figure bonuses, 5-figure stock options. Everything that my father came to this land for himself, I had that. But you get a bunch of messages from people like that Napkin Notes dad. Maybe you've worked with people who are facing life adversities, tragedy. You do enough of that, and then you stare me right in the face and tell me that this life is somehow just about money. Nah, money is only a means to an end. And that end we must choose. So I thought maybe I should quit my job, right? Start a nonprofit. Terrible idea. I would learn how hard charity is firsthand. And I learned that lesson every day now, apparently. But in the beginning, it didn't make any sense for me to leave my job because this is what was happening. I mean, this whole thing was going viral with promise cards through social media. I was making all this money from the software company, but then I was spending tens of thousands of dollars of my paychecks on stamps and envelopes and promise cards, right? Donations weren't coming in, so I had to use my own wallet. Didn't make any sense to leave my job financially, but emotionally one day I'd be pushed over the edge. Long before any of the stories I've just told you, there was this letter that was sitting at my desk at work, which is strange. It was just there when I got back. No postmarking on it, nobody's name on it but my own, anonymous. This letter would convince me to quit my job, and I'd like to read part of it to you right now. It was February of 2013. I'm sitting at my desk in Cleveland, Ohio, and I read, "Hi, Alex. I've been keeping up with your blog. Because I Said I Would has really, really helped me through a rough patch. There have been lots of times where I didn't think life was worth living, and I almost took my life. Almost. I'm getting stronger every day, and a lot of that strength comes from a few promise cards I've written. I have lots of people who care about me. I'm a very, very lucky person. It took a lot for me to realize that I should be alive. I do have a purpose. I'm not sure if I would even be around if it wasn't for you and your organization. So thanks, Mr. Sheen. I know I'm supposed to write this on a card, but I want to promise you that I will not give up. Now, I'm not embarrassed at this moment, nor will I ever be, to say that I sat at my desk that day and I cried, thinking about what my father might say about a promise like that. I mean, did he even think of promises like that? I stood up in this office in this sea of people, and I wondered, who is it? Is it a friend of mine who just didn't want me to know what they were going through, so they left their name off of it? Or is this a complete stranger? 1,400 people, you can't know them all. More importantly, this letter gave me the courage to do what I knew already had to be done. And that was to leave my life of comfort, to go alone and help people in what little ways I know how. So I asked for a meeting with my boss. Just through email, she didn't know what this meeting was about, but she agreed to it. And I remember walking into her office with this letter in hand. She was there sitting at her desk, pretending to work or whatever bosses are doing in there all the time. I give her this letter and I say, "Hey, boss, if you could just read this, it would make it a lot easier for me to do what I got to do right now." And she says, "Sure, Alex, no problem." She unfolds this college-ruled piece of notebook paper and she reads as much as I have quite literally read to you just now. But then she stops. Like halfway through the letter, she just stops reading. She looks up at me and she says, "Alex, this letter." She says, "Alex, this letter is from my daughter. This is her handwriting," she says. This is about her. That envelope you're holding, those are the kind of envelopes I have on my kitchen counter. Alex, when did she give this to you? My boss says. You see, I didn't know this, but my boss's daughter had been suffering through depression, something that a lot of people are feeling right about now. And in depression, I believe that time, support, reaching out for help, I believe there's a path to hope. That is what I believe. But at age 14, my boss's daughter did not yet share this thought. You see, she was overweight, and she would go to school, and kids decided that they were going to pick on her for that. So she'd come home in this feeling of rejection and sorrow, not knowing how to handle her emotions. She would cut herself. But you see, this family, they knew about promise cards long before the world. And I know it's just a 1-cent piece of paper. And maybe I don't have to explain it to a group like this, but sometimes it helps to write it down. Maybe not to quit forever, because honestly, forever is too far to hold. How about just not today? Write that again tomorrow. See if we can get these things to stack up. My boss's daughter would write this letter and end her habit of self-harm. She would ask perhaps an older student to drive her to the place where I worked, where her parents worked. She would sneak into our office like some kind of childhood ninja, right? I imagine her in like a ninja outfit doing a bunch of cartwheels past security. She'd find inter-office mail, which I don't even know where the hell that's at. This letter would be dropped in my inbox, and that's part of the reason that I'm talking to you right now. See, I'm all in. And I'm here to ask you to be a part of something. In your own way, in your own life. We are a social movement, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the betterment of humanity through promises made and kept. That's how I believe this world is made better. When each and every one of us, on our shoulders and on our backs, takes the burden of a promise to improve ourselves, our families, a community, a cause, or just helping one person get through a difficult time. Individual responsibility. Because of stories like my boss's daughter, our charity decided to focus its efforts, even in the early days. We decided to focus our efforts in schools because teaching children reading, writing, math, science, that is all incredibly important. But if we do not teach our children how to be decent human beings to one another, then you tell me what the point of society is at all. That's why, because I said I would heavily invest into character development, teaching concepts like accountability, self-control, compassion in the classroom. We've done live character development and social emotional learning programs with over 179,000 students in the last 7 years alone. You know, working on concepts like the 4 types of self-control, limiting beliefs, even things like time management are very important if you're going to reach a goal, especially through adversity. But we can't just make these promises to ourselves. We have to take the skills we learn and make commitments to others in need. And that's why our students make promises to their community, volunteering projects that they do independently. We do this type of work not only in schools, but also in a correctional setting. Programs in prisons and juvenile detention centers. It's been a process to learn how self-control plays out in so many parts of society. But you and I, we could sit here, laugh and cry together for the rest of our time, but that's really not going to make it any easier to wake up tomorrow. We are tired of hearing that we sit in an unprecedented moment, but it remains to be true. So how can we make it easier to keep promises, to keep commitments in this crisis? In the thousands of conversations I've had with people about their commitments, I'd like to share 3 perspectives that I think might be interesting to you as coaches. The first thing I want to talk about is the biology of a promise. Now, if you were to take a person and put them into literally like an MRI machine, and you started to ask them questions about the future, the frontal lobe of their brain would start to light up. Now, the frontal lobe of the brain is responsible for a lot of different things, but apparently one of them is future planning, right? Which is interesting, because if you think about every species on this entire planet, human beings are almost solely capable of thinking about the future, certainly to the capacity that we can. Meaning, like, most organisms don't even know that there is a future, which is strange. But for us as humans, that capacity gives us so much capability, but also a tremendous burden. Because when we are even little kids, we think to ourselves, well, I've got to do well in middle school because that's going to put me in a position for high school. And apparently I've got to get good grades on these tests and get into a college or get into a trade. I've got to pay these bills and earn enough to retire, marry someone, raise kids. Like, since we're little kids, we just worry about the future. But somewhere along the way, someone, for even just a single promise, even if it's just that, they come along and they say, listen, I can tell you what the future will be. For this one thing, I promise you that this will happen. And like that anxiety washes away. I mean, maybe there is something biological about making promises that makes us nervous, that brings us calm when someone actually follows through. It's a powerful thing. It's a biological thing, I believe, and that's why we need to be careful with it. In a specific way. I think that a lot of people were so used to hearing these almost cinematic commitments in movies and books and social media posts that we use absolutes a lot, right? And that's what we need to be careful of. We need to be careful with words like always, anything, forever, every time, no matter what, never. Like, a lot of people use these words in the promises they make so that the other person feels that sense of calm. But, do we really mean this? When I interview people for positions at Because I Said I Would, I literally check a little box. Like, I make marks for every time they say something like, oh, well, I always would do this, or I would never do that. Because the looser we are with our word choice to make that other person feel good, it may mean that we're actually breaking promises because we're not being literal. We're just saying things to make others feel good, And that's a decent thing because we're trying to people please, we're trying to make people happy. But if we're making promises that we don't ever end up keeping, if there's so much miscommunication in a relationship because of that, like a desire to swell the promise to enormity, it doesn't help anybody. So that's the first thing I want to talk about, a little bit about the biology of promises in the frontal lobe. But then I want to dive a little bit into a concept that I call accountability threshold. So for just a moment, take, I don't know, the 5 people in your life that you talk to the most. It doesn't have to be a perfect list, but imagine in your mind's eye those 5 people and then float a number over their head. And what this number is going to represent is the amount of accountability that person can take before they kind of break down and start to deflect, start to blame other things and other people, right? So you can imagine someone with like a score like an 89, if they break a promise to you, they say, listen, I'm not here to waste your time. I apologize. I was supposed to be there. I broke a commitment to you and I'm sorry, right? That's like a higher number. A lower number, like this number 14, which looks like a teenage Freddy Krueger or something. Anyways, that's not the point. Somebody with a lower number would start to deflect immediately. You'd say, hey, man, I was wondering about this commitment. And they say, oh, well, remember the time you broke that promise, or you were late, or they start bringing up all kinds of other things and they can't take accountability. So that number, while it's kind of made up and it's up to you to assign it, I call it an accountability threshold. It's the amount of personal responsibility someone can tolerate emotionally before they begin blaming others or deflecting to seemingly unrelated grievances. They start bringing up other stuff. And I use this a lot as I'm coaching and talking to folks, just a mental exercise before I step into that room to hold someone accountable. This is what I do. I prepare for that conversation by assigning a number 1 to 100 over that person's head before I turn the knob to that door. I also say to myself, I decide, how much do I want to risk this relationship? Meaning some situations, especially in a pandemic, they may be life or death. And so you have to use firm language. And if that person honestly doesn't like it, well, that's going to be what it is. It has a level of seriousness that might say, hey, if you want to step away from this job, from this relationship, from this friendship, well, that's going to be what it is. But I have to bring seriousness to this moment. Or it might be something where I need to choose a softer language, less firm word choice, because I don't want that person to sort of shut down, right? I want them to hear what I'm saying, even if I don't reach the level of seriousness that I need to. You know, sometimes things aren't always going to work out the way we want. We need the person to keep their ears open, so we choose softer language so that the relationship maintains, and then slowly from there we build. So that's the second thing I wanted to talk about. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was I don't have to, I get to. It's a phrase that you may have heard before. There are a lot of concepts that are ubiquitous in personal development, in character development, social emotional learning, but this phrase specifically means a lot to me, and I'll share it through an example. Okay, so these two, these are my babies, okay? This is Bubba on the bottom, Tubu on the top. They're my two dogs. By the way, they're out in my RV in the driveway right now, so they don't interrupt this presentation. So I'll get them after, but that's not the point. The point is that every morning, Bubba and Tubu, at about like 6 in the morning, it's usually Tubu, he puts both of his paws on my chest while I am dead asleep. And he says to me, Daddy, I want to go outside, you know? And I think to myself, especially when I'm tired, I say to myself, why do I have to do this? You know? Especially when life just feels overwhelmed. Like, I have to do all of these things. I have to support the charity. I've got to wake up. I got to put in all these hours, and I have to let my dogs out. Like, why do I have to do this? And you may have felt moments like that recently. I have to? Not exactly, no. You see, last year I had a dog. Her name was Kimchi. And she was with me for 14 years. She was my baby. And she passed away. You know what I would give to you for one more day to let her out? Well, I get those days with these two. I don't have to do that. I get to. I don't have to call my grandparents. I am 36 years old, and I still have grandparents to call. I don't have to do anything. I get to. So there are a lot of phrases, there are a lot of ways to frame motivation through gratitude, but this specific phrase works for me like every day. I say it a ton. I don't have to. I get to. And I challenge you to think about that. What is something during the last 2 years that felt like an obligation, but to someone else in the world would be a gift? My name is Alex Sheen, and I'm the founder of Because I Said I Would. To me, it's an honor to share with you how this card was born in my life, what it means to me, what it means to others, and a little bit about what we do, because most of the time I don't get this kind of chance, especially with a group like you. Most of the time, speak as much as I do, most of the time things like this just spread through like social media or the news, right? You know, the Today Show jams a camera in my face and they say, Alex, you got 30 seconds. Try to explain it all. And how that comes across to people watching TV, they're like, oh, this guy, Alex Sheen, he makes promises or something. He wears the same shirt every day or for some reason, you know. And then they just change the channel. They think it's about me. Well, if it was about me, I would take the $1 million that I make in a year just giving speeches, and I would stay home a wealthy man. But instead, 100% of that money goes to the charity. I make as much as a kindergarten teacher, and this is not about me. And I will go so far as to say that it isn't even about my own father. Now, that's not to say that I don't miss him. You know, used to be when I was growing up and I'd get good grades, or maybe like I got a promotion at work or something, like he was the person I called. I mean, he worked so hard to make it in this country. He was very hard to impress. But when you heard that tone and that look in his eye, you knew you accomplished something. Now I accomplish all these things and I don't care to call anyone. I miss my father. But in everything I wish I could say to him, I assure you that this is not about him. This is not about me. This has always been, and hear me clearly, this has always been and it forever will be. This is about This is about you. Because my dad, Al Sheen, he is gone forever. I've come to accept that. But you and I, we are still here. And we may not all come from the highest levels of education or the greatest families or the wealthiest of resources. But each and every one of us, you and me, we were born with the ability, one step at a time, to become a stronger version of ourselves. Or maybe help someone do that same thing. That is what I'm asking you to believe in. And so as you go through the rest of 2022, with everybody that you talk to, you may come to moments where it seems overwhelming, that you don't think you're the one to do it. That's fair. It's natural. Doubt is a part of keeping a promise. And when you come to that moment, remember these final words that I'll share with you. Something one of my former employees said to me once. Her name's Katie Spots. Katie once said to me, Alex, it's okay to think that you can't do it. It's okay to think that you can't do it, but that doesn't mean you're right. You know what I mean? Thank you so much.
I could see from everything in chat how much everyone has been moved by that. So we raise our hands and move our hands in thanks to Alex, since we all can't necessarily clap, but we can show our appreciation. And again, seeing all of the impact that had on so many of us, just to show that gratitude for hearing that message today. And I recognize even for myself that I'm in front of you today because of a promise that I made. This month is the 9-year anniversary that I sat in a room with my own mother as she passed away. And it was one of the most challenging days, and it still continues to be one of the most challenging events of my life. But I also, from that, recognize that my mother, who was born in the segregated southeastern part of the United States, who had so few opportunities compared to what I had just because I was born in a different generation. And I recognized I was wasting that. And I had focused on what she taught me to, career, and doing all the things that I knew I was supposed to do, right? Those supposed tos. And her passing away, and my recognizing how many opportunities I had that she could have not even fathomed, especially at my age, is what resulted in me making a promise that I'm going to see the world. And I've been from Hong Kong to the Serengeti to the Cristo Redentor in Rio in Brazil. And I wanted to just live. And that allowed me to not go back to a career that I knew was quote unquote safe, but to do something different, to step into what I get to do every day. I love to use that phrase, I get to do the work I do as a coach, as someone who's helping others uncover their authenticity and their true paths. And I didn't recognize really until today, hearing Alex's story, that I'm here in front of all of you and hopefully helping and serving others as well because of a promise that I made. So those are opportunities that we all have to grow and to contribute in our own special individual ways. So we want to take this energy and this incredible, just intrinsic desire to use our experiences and the strength and the resilience and the love that we have within us to start to have some discussions in our breakout rooms. Alex talks about the difference between promises and goals, and he suggests that goals are future focused and can be impacted by external focus or forces, whereas promises are personal and the person making them is solely responsible and accountable for acting upon them. Think about how that distinction applies to the work that you're doing now, the work that you're doing to serve your members, serve your chapters, and how can we shift our focus to the things we can control, the promises we make, versus the things that may be out of our control, those goals. And then also the overarching theme of Because I Said I Would is to write out the promises we make and exchange them with the people for whom we want to make a difference. How can we apply this? What promises do you think your chapters can make or maybe have made that you haven't acted upon? And then how can we ensure that we don't repeat our missteps? And then, of course, what promises are you prepared to make and with whom? So I made a promise 9 years ago to take risks, to take advantage of the opportunities that were in front of me that my mother never had. And now let's use that same kind of energy and what we heard Alex share with us to start to look at our own promises and what we can do to change the communities in the world that we're a part of. We'll head into our breakout rooms and we'll have a little catch up when we come back. They return. Maybe a little weepy. We're still wiping our eyes a little bit, but hopefully our hearts are full in many ways, coming back from just an incredible experience and incredible discussion. So we're going to turn it over to Saul here. So raise your hand to Saul. We're going to hear from a few of our breakout groups. Again, want to keep it brief. I know this is a tough one. I get all the ones that we got. It's tough to keep these brief, but we want to make sure we can hear from at least a few of you before we head into our final break. So Saul, take it away.
Thank you. And we already have a couple of hands up. So let's jump right into it. Tony, will you please share with us?
Yes, our group talked about how his story provided goosebump moments, and how we show up is really important, and being in the present so that we can notice. And then really it chiseled down to, it's really about our story. It's a story that to share with others. And that breaks down the bias, the barriers, diversity, inclusion. It allows us to connect with one another in a very powerful way. Story is a connection, a powerful one.
Thank you very much, Tony. And I must say that I really enjoyed, I was part of that break room along with you, Joanne and Paula, so really enjoyed it. Thank you. We next have Van Vies.
Thank you, Phil. So I was with a group in room 7 with Tanya and a few others. So our conversation was also extremely heart-centered, and we just realized that the common thread amongst, I think, most of us there was a very recent loss, and how that has shifted our perspective to like not just focusing on goals and have tos and need to versus, I get to. And we had our newest chapter, Guatemala, the president from there, share about, his promises to himself about balancing his goals versus, what his promise is to his chapter and to himself. So it was such an engaging conversation. I honestly don't remember every single detail, and yet I think we walked away with just such warmth and connection. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thanks to you. Next we have Andrea.
Hi, everyone. We had 3 things really stood out in our breakout room. One was we had a member in our breakout room, a chapter leader, who didn't speak any English. And we were fortunate enough to have another breakout member, Payina from Washington, who did speak Spanish. So she was able to translate and really include all of the members of our breakout room together for the conversation, which was a real, we were really grateful to have. And the 2 points that stood out, one was that sort of difference between promises and goals, and then also including oneself in making promises, like promises that are important to oneself for moving forward. And then also the necessity of the second part of it, not only promises made, but promises kept, and how important it is to make the promises that you can fulfill and fulfill them, as opposed to being enthusiastic and making a bunch of promises and then not fulfilling them.
¿En serio?
We got somebody unmuted.
That's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Andrea. We have time for one more call out, and then we to move along with the agenda. So Monica, will you please?
Sure. Hi. I was in a group with Maddie and Cosmos, and Angelica, I hope I'm saying everybody's names right. We really looked at the difference again between goals and promise, and like we can set a goal of member engagement, and we can't promise that we will engage every member. So there's a real difference between the two. We can promise to, it's like it puts your heart and soul and commitment into something, whereas a goal, it feels a little more transactional. And a goal without a promise feels very transactional. I don't know if I'm saying that right. And what else? A promise, like asking the promise kinds of questions lets you go much deeper than just saying, we're going to set a goal to do X, Y, or Z for our chapter. What do we promise? That like, I keep touching my heart because a promise almost comes from the heart in my mind. And then just being aware of what you can't control. You know, you can't promise to fill every role, or we can't promise to have X number of people at a meeting, but we can promise to do our best to make those things happen. So what are the little baby steps that we can do? And it all felt like it was navigating, like when you make a promise to be the best person you can be, it's almost like that navigating or that future self kind of thing. And I think doing more of that within the chapter would be great too.
Thank you very much, Monica. I'm sorry we won't be able to get to everybody, but I encourage you to please share any additional thoughts in our chat. Thank you. Back to you, Tanya.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much. And please share in the chat. I saw Luis still had some things, and Antonio, so please share in the chat. We want to make sure everyone's voice is heard. And we're going to head into our break, another quick break, and then we'll be back to start to wrap up our day 3. Thank you all. We'll see you shortly.